down
Fair enough.
the road of my life.
Hello everyone, welcome to Transparent Talks. I am your new host and managing editor of the Eastern Echo, Allie Graham. Today I am joined by two guests with me, the first being student senator and president of College Republicans, Nick Galluzzo, and the other being also student senator and president of the Young Democratic Socialists of EMU, Colton Ray. Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So just to get started, do you want to tell me a little bit about your major, minor, and graduation year?
Sure. I'm a graduating senior here at Eastern. I'm a criminology major with a legal studies concentration. I plan to further my education, go on to law school. I've already sent applications out and all of that. Yeah, that's what I plan on doing after I finish out my undergrad here.
My major is sociology, and then my minors currently are political science and philosophy. That one I recently picked up the philosophy part. My plan right now is to definitely focus on getting my bachelor's and then go on to master's, getting my master's in schools, society, and violence. It's like in the sociological department, and then with that, hopefully either becoming like a guidance counselor actually, or like doing public policy, like advocacy.
Yeah. So more related to your careers, where do you see yourself in 5 years after EMU?
Yeah, so in about 5 years, I plan on having completed my law degree and pursuing pursuing that, whether that is the more prosecutorial route with an assistant DA-ship or something like that, or going the appellate route, becoming an appellate attorney. I recently did the simulation Supreme Court here at Eastern, and I found, I found that the appellate process was very interesting to me. So definitely something in the constitutional or criminal sphere. Criminal justice policy really interests me, so that's another avenue I could take with that.
Colton?
Since this year I'm a sophomore, and I probably will end up having to take an extra semester to finish my bachelor's. So with that, chances are I'll be in the midst of getting my master's degree in 5 years, while also working part-time, probably on campus, because I am hoping to be able to get work study. So.
Yeah. So you two are both involved in student government, obviously. So when did you first start that, and why did you want to join?
Yeah, so I started, my very first sort of foray into the student government sphere was actually the tail end of my sophomore year. There was an opening on student government, and I applied to get appointed onto the Senate, and I did. So I was on the Senate probably for the winter semester of that year. Then I took a bit of a break my junior year. There were some things I had to get in order, and then I've returned to it this year. And what really, I think, made me want to get involved is that I think a big part of being a good student and being involved in the academic life is becoming familiar with and involved with the decisions that most impact your life as a student. And I wanted to really know where, be in the room where it all happens, and really have that understanding.
Yeah. Colton?
So I joined student government the second semester of my freshman year. It was, I believe, the beginning of February, in which I actually joined. I went to meetings and prior to that, for the whole Senate application process, and I spoke before the Senate, and they wanted to take me on. And since then, I have been mostly focusing on finding just more information, really, about the privatization, or how some people prefer to phrase it, the partnerships that we have entered, and how that impacts student life. And in that process, I have also became a lot more aware of different issues that various student populations are facing on campus. And I still don't totally believe that I can necessarily voice everyone's opinion. I feel like getting student representation directly from student, the dean of students, or just like, I definitely like what we do with student government, but I still feel like there are limitations. And I think I've learned and became a lot more aware of those limitations by the process of being a senator. So.
And both of you are also presidents of your own organizations. So do you want to tell me a little bit about yours and kind of your role as president?
Yeah, sure. College Republicans is it's an activist organization, and really our main goals are to promote Republican and conservative policy, both on campus and in the broader context. The way we do that is we work really closely with a lot of state party agencies and organs and things like that, and do things like door knocking, phone banking, and just our own individual personal activism for the causes that we would like to see promoted. And my role is really to organize all of that, to mediate our relationship between the state party and our organization, and to ensure that the things we do are well organized and are done in constructive manners.
So for the Young Democratic Socialists, we have definitely taken the approach more so of focusing on like campus and Ypsilanti related political issues. A lot of it has to do with definitely like community activism in regards to like whether it be providing tenants more information that a lot of students especially, but tenants in general, never really learn, and landlords, especially in Ypsilanti, like to take advantage of that. Outside of that, we have also been advocating for better practices in the Eastern community, especially in terms of making sure that students have access to resources like mental health funding, accessibility concerns, housing especially as well. We feel that if housing is to be privatized, that there are a lot of implications that it will have for students that we can already see when you look at food, dining for example, the drastic increase in people who use Swoop's Food Pantry on campus, I think has partly to do with how supportive Swoops has been for students and the good spread of availability for that service. But I also think a lot of it has to do with a university that has in the past definitely prided itself on being very affordable, but not when you compare us to other universities in Michigan where we really don't have that draw anymore. And I think we need to get back to that. So.
Yeah, so kind of to add what you were just saying, what sort of policies or changes would you guys like to see more implemented on campus?
On campus. So my own personal goal that I would like to see happen is just a little bit more transparency on the part of the administration. I've spoken to a lot of students who have expressed concern for that, and I myself have had experiences where there appears to be something of a failure on the part of the administration to effectively communicate what's going on with the students it affects. An example I can think of off the top of my head is a couple years ago, there were a series of sports that were eliminated from Eastern's athletic programs, one of them being the diving team, which my brother was a part of. And his impression and the impression of a lot of the students that were affected by that was that there just wasn't that advanced warning, and a lot of the students who were the most affected by that were kind of set adrift without really having time to get their affairs in order and be able to accept a blow that big. So just little things like that, trying to really bridge that gap between administration and students so that the things that they do, the students are more aware of.
I actually, it's funny because Nick and I will catch ourselves agreeing, I feel like way more often than people would think we would. I definitely think that transparency in regards to students' but like students in the administration, it's very lacking. It's very much so. I think also when you look at how, in general, the administration prioritizes student affairs, I think there is way too much priority being put on athletics. I fully am support of athletic programs being part of our campus community, but I think when you have students en masse leaving because they cannot afford to go to our university or because they have mental health concerns that don't really, I know if you take below a certain amount of credits, a lot of students will lose their scholarship, lose their financial aid. There isn't really much that people can do with how we have it right now. So I think getting a housing scholarship and also increasing mental health funding on campus is huge.
All right, we are taking a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.
Welcome to Ypsilanti. Here you'll meet the talented, the fascinating, the proud. Students with the arena to question.
Just hers
Artists
guide. But yeah,
with
seriously,
the room
it's
to
the actual
create.
pack. It's right there.
Entrepreneurs with freedom to risk. History buffs with the opportunity to explore. Here, we value authentic conversation over created facade.
Yeah,
We
I
value
was trying not to
passion
like
over
look too much
promotion.
on like
And we value uniqueness over the expected. Ypsilanti. We are unfiltered. We are authentic. We are real. Ipsy real. True EMU. You are welcome here.
So I tried logging into my .emish account and it wouldn't let me in. So I went down to the help desk and they said I had already changed my password. No I didn't. Shortly after that, my apartment was broken into. Yeah, if you put 2 and 2 together, you know where they go. My address. They got my password, got onto my .emish account, and stole my class schedule and my home address. They knew when I wasn't going to be home. I should have known that a password of ABCD1234 isn't too hard to guess. Now, I'm more careful about choosing a password. I take a word that's 8 to 10 letters long and that isn't too personal to me, and I change some characters around. For example, the word college, C-O-L-L-E-G-E. I can change the L's to 7s and the E's to question marks. Don't use college, okay? You have passwords for a reason. Take the time to make one that is unique and easy for you to remember, yet hard for someone else to figure out. My name is Daniel, and I'm trying to be safe.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I am still joined by Nick Galluzzo and Colton Ray. So right now I think would be a really great time to, since we are on such opposite wings here, I think this is a really great time to discuss politics on a larger level. So just to get into it, who are you currently supporting for the 2020 U.S. election?
I am supporting the current President of the United States, Donald Trump, in his re-election bid, largely due to the fact that there doesn't seem to be really anybody else on the field right now that I think would be better fit. There are a couple challengers from the Republican side, but looking into their policies and the way they go about things, I think that the current president's track record, the policies he has promoted in his time as president, I think definitely is deserving of at least another term, especially with the field in the state that it is.
I support Bernie Sanders for president. I supported Bernie in 2016 prior to being able to vote, and I still support him in 2020. I think when you look at American politics right now, there's a lot of populist energy. I feel like in part that can explain also why people are gravitating towards Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. To me, I feel like Bernie does a much better job at building a multiracial grassroots movement of people who want to change the structure of our system. I don't think he is necessarily calling for a revolution, and I don't think he's a communist as he gets painted to be. And I also think that there is a lot of mainstream upheaval that he is so popular among the general populace, especially among young voters. And I think it has to do with his he's simultaneously very anti-establishment, yet wants to use power in a more equitable and just more, socialized way, ultimately. He's definitely a democratic socialist to the core.
So what are some policies that you are most passionate about within the U.S. that you think Donald Trump would do best to carry out in your favor?
Yeah, so I think a lot of those policies are really the ones that he's done in his tenure so far. The ones I typically point to is his role within the federal judiciary. I think the effect that he's had over the federal judiciary since his inauguration, he's gotten about 187 federal court judges, and he just got his 50th judge on the appeal circuit. So I think that is something that is really good that I'm looking for. More textualist, originalist judges in the federal judiciary. That's one really good thing. Another thing actually has been his stance on criminal justice policy. The First Step Act was recently passed within the last year, which focuses criminal justice policy away from the sort of get tough war on drug era criminal policies that have really marked our criminal justice system for the last 30 years, and is instituting a lot more rehabilitation, restorative justice focused policies, and as well as reforming mandatory minimums, which is, as an advocate for judicial discretion, that's something that I definitely really appreciate from him. So those are just two quick things.
Yeah. Colton, what are some policies that you're really passionate about that you think Bernie Sanders would carry out for you?
There's a lot. I think one that definitely comes to mind is his immigration policy. He has evolved a lot on that issue because while he recognizes that there are large multinational corporations that like to exploit cheap labor all throughout the globe, there is also a humanitarian crisis, I'd argue, that has been at our southern border during Clinton and Obama's administration too, but also especially with the Trump administration. I think when you see the way in which people are not even being provided legal counsel at the border when they're trying to seek asylum is borderline criminal. I think that in the global scheme of things, I think Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who is truly anti-war, and that's been something that I've been passionate about for a long time. I think when you look at U.S. interference in especially Latin America and African nations since, especially since the 1940s and 50s, I think there hasn't really been a chance globally for what was once termed like third world, but we now call it developing nations. They haven't had a chance to develop because their entire economy is based off of exporting goods to more wealthy nations, and it essentially keeps the colonial practices that have been in place, just more like in a de facto way through economic policy. And then also his environmental policy too. I'm a very strong advocate for it because I think when we think about transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy, there's a lot of people who are going to be losing their jobs in the process, and there also has to be an emphasis on frontline communities who have been negatively impacted by environmental policy. I think people can't be left behind through that transition, and I think that's why the Green New Deal does a good job of providing jobs for people who are, would otherwise lose employment, and also make sure that continued environmental pollution doesn't negatively impact the people who contribute the least to that pollution.
Okay. So just to voice disagreements as well as agreements, what is your opinion on Bernie Sanders and his campaign?
Right, so Bernie Sanders and his campaign. I think probably just one quick thing to address is, since you mentioned it, Colton, Bernie's environmental policy. I think when it comes to concepts of the Green New Deal and environmental policy, I think a lot of these policies are really based in I would probably say the misunderstanding of our present situation, or at least the characterization of our present climate situation as a pending, looming disaster. When you sort of look into the data on these issues, that picture becomes a little bit more nuanced. For example, NASA did a study of using their satellites of Earth vegetation and greenery over the last, say, I think it was the last decade. And the Earth is actually greener today than it was 20 years ago. The planet has added approximately the equivalent of the entirety of North America in vegetation, leafy vegetation across the planet. And it's just things like that start to pop up that really lend to the idea that maybe this isn't the apocalypse that we're presented it to be. And I think the policies that are designed to address that apocalyptic situation would have far more disastrous implications to especially our economy, given the fact that a lot of the green technologies that we would be promoted to switch over to just aren't at the stage of development to make them viable options for a nationwide change. So that's just a couple things I have on that particular policy.
Okay. Colton, are there any policies about Donald Trump or Donald Trump's current administration that you find unfavorable?
I do. I think his rhetoric especially, I can even see people who generally agree with his economic policies that will agree that his rhetoric is very inflammatory and divisive. Going beyond that, I think his promise of restoring the American economy, I think when you look at stock market, when you look at GDP growth, I think he has done a good job. But I also think when you look at where that wealth is going, you see, I want to say it was 84% of the new wealth that has been created since those tax cuts were put in place has gone to the top 1%. You still have communities who are working very, very tirelessly and still barely getting by. You have a population of I want to say 40-something% of homeless people do have employment, and yet this promise that if you have employment, that if you are trying to make your way up the social ladder, that you're at least going to be able to afford your basic necessities. I think that is, blatantly untrue, and I don't really see the Trump administration focusing on that. I also see how there's been cuts to food stamps, for example. There are, I want to say, 700,000 people who are now going to be losing out on those benefits, which in a lot of people's situations it's barely even enough to be able to afford the food that they need for themselves and their families. I don't see why you would do that and then also increase defense spending by $100 billion. The deficit that has been created under his presidency has not gone in line with the ideal of balanced budgets, and it's especially not focused on social programs, which I feel like are needed in order to lift all people up.
Right. So, very quickly, do you want to address any misconceptions about your desired candidate that you would just like to give your opinion on?
Yeah, so I think the mentioning of the defense spending, I hear this one all the time, and just my reaction to it is, let's not pretend that it is in fact our defense spending that is driving us toward austerity and driving our deficits. I will agree with you that the president has not done as much as I would have liked as a fiscal conservative to address those deficit issues. But when you have programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and a lot of these other welfare entitlement programs, comprising 60% of our entire federal budget, our entire $3 to $4 trillion federal budget, a $100 billion increase to defense spending is a drop in the bucket when compared to this giant welfare state that we've gotten ourselves into. So that's just one thing I would like to address.
Quick, do you have any rebuttal on any misconceptions about Bernie Sanders?
I think people are way too quick to call Bernie a totalitarian, dictator. I think it's it's very disingenuous. He is a big advocate for civil liberties. He's a big advocate for criminal justice reform. He wants to end the practices of for-profit systems in which, from my view of freedom, how I view freedom is very, negative towards it. I think people need to have access to education if they,
Well, thank you guys for joining me today, and thank you for watching Transparent Talks.